This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Jesus is not the Lord of the Abyss. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Again, this week, if you're watching this program, you probably already agree with that statement. But I think it's necessary to address this issue as we continue engaging with a particular teacher who I won't name. And I will say again, as I said last week, looking at his social media feeds, we seem to agree on most social and political issues. If we met under other circumstances, we'd probably get along quite well. But I find his teachings dangerous on a couple of levels, and I'll explain why as we go on this week. Before we go, I want to point out the cap over here in the corner, you may have noticed. Yes, as I'm wearing my representing for Kenny C and his The Rock t-shirt. Same folks making it. In fact, it is Kenny C and his fiancee Gidget Manning. Tell you how you can get the GHTV and now a PID radio cap before the end of our program this week. The teaching we're addressing here is one that claims that the God of the Old Testament, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is not Jesus. Now, as a Trinitarian Christian, we have been taught that Jesus, the Son, God, Yeshua, or Yahweh, the Father, and the Holy Spirit are all three part of the Godhead. They are not each other. They're individual, distinct, unique, but they together are one in the Godhead. Now, this is a mind-blowing concept, but we're dealing with an entity who spoke the universe into existence and exists outside of our time-space domain. So I'm not sure we should be expected to get our heads around this. In fact, if we did understand it fully, it sort of implies that we'd be on his level. And having looked in the mirror, I'm pretty confident that I'm not there and will never be. The teaching begins by positing that because there are things in the Old Testament that seem uncharacteristic for Jesus in the New Testament. In other words, God in the Old Testament sometimes comes across as harsh, judgmental, mean, capricious, even bloodthirsty. And that is not the impression that many people have of Jesus. Just read the book of Revelation. Just saying. So the conclusion that's drawn is that they cannot be the same personage. This was a heresy that was introduced by the son of a bishop, a fellow named Marcion, from the northern part of what is now Turkey, from the kingdom of Pontus in the year 144 AD. And the church had to grapple with this and try to eradicate it for the next 300 years. Because for people who don't read the Bible carefully, you can make this conclusion. Or if you read the Bible selectively and only choose to accept the parts that appeal to you, you can reach this conclusion. But that really isn't an option for us. If we start picking and choosing the parts of the Bible that we don't want to accept, we are creating a God in our image. I mean, in my view, and there are people who would argue this, but in my view, this particular idea that God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, cannot be Jesus because he's mean, really comes down to this. I would not do this, so therefore either God cannot do this or I cannot accept a God who would do this. Okay, again, it's an understandable line of thinking because the problem of evil in this world is certainly distressing. I get it. We look at the headlines, especially now in our 24-hour news cycle in the presence of social media where anybody with a camera phone, which is mainly all of us, can share images around the world of tragedies and atrocities occurring in real time. And if you're a thinking and an empathetic person, you can be forgiven for wondering, how can a good God allow this sort of thing to happen? Well, this is not a new thing. This is not a new objection to the existence of God or to the identification of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the Jesus of the New Testament. This really came about first in the 4th century BC, or at least the first to really put this forward in a cogent manner was the Greek philosopher Epicurus. Epicurus late 4th, early 3rd century BC, he was a believer that in a naturalistic worldview, that atoms, okay, the ancient Greeks had the concept of atoms, these small little building blocks of matter. Epicurus believed that atoms moved under their own power, that they, through random chance, clumped together to form everything. So you can see how the thinking of Epicurus still influences our world today, because even the gods, according to Epicurus, were formed by this random chance process. Time plus goo equals you. And he believed that the gods, while they existed, were neutral parties who didn't bother to intervene in human affairs. And this is where he came up with the idea of the problem of evil. Proposition 1, God exists. Proposition 2, evil exists. So the conclusion is either God sees evil taking place and can't do anything about it, in which case he's weak, or God sees evil taking place and doesn't care, in which case he's evil. So again, this is a philosophical question that people have been wrestling with since before Jesus walked the earth. In fact, the 4th century Christian theologian Lactantius wrote this, again, describing Epicurus and his framing of the problem of evil. God, he says, referring to Epicurus, either wants to eliminate bad things and cannot, or can but does not want to, or neither wishes to nor can, or both wants to and can. If he wants to and cannot, then he is weak, and this does not apply to God. If he can but does not want to, then he is spiteful, which is equally foreign to God's nature. If he neither wants to nor can, he is both weak and spiteful, and so not a God. If he wants to and can, which is the only thing fitting for a God, where do bad things come from? Or why does he not eliminate them? Lactantius continues, I know that most of the philosophers who defend divine providence are commonly shaken by this argument, and against their wills are almost driven to admit that God does not care, which is exactly what Epicurus is looking for. End quote. Now, Epicurus was a proponent of the idea that the only point in life was to avoid pain, to experience as much pleasure as possible, because, we're just made up of random atoms that arrange themselves by chance. The gods don't care, and after you die, there's really nothing, so you might as well enjoy life. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That was essentially the motto or the worldview of Epicurus. Paul, by the way, debated the Epicureans on Mars Hill. You can see why they wanted to get into a debate with Paul, because they must have thought they had an easy mark there. I would have loved to have seen that debate, because Paul, with his brilliance, engaging this particular argument, would have had a field day. Now, I'm no Paul. Paul's my middle name, which I carry with honor. It was also my father's name, which is why I'm proud to carry it. But Paul, I am not. I'm not in his league intellectually or with the written word. But I would suggest this for an answer to the problem of evil. 2 words, free will. Now, that may seem like a simplistic answer, but think about it. God created all of us with free will. You, me, and every denizen of the unseen realm. And we can see in Scripture that among us humans, there are none righteous, no, not one, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. As John wrote, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Why? Because we have free will and we can choose to do bad things. But the same holds true in the spirit realm. See Genesis chapter 3, for example, the incident in the garden. You see Genesis chapter 6, the evidence that those sons of God from Genesis 6 sinned is in 2 Peter 2, verse 4. God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but thrust them down to Tartarus, not Hades, Tartarus. It says hell in English, but the Greek word is Tartarus. That's a place reserved for supernatural rebels who had to be punished. And Jude likewise says the angels who'd sinned, and in the context of Jude and 2 Peter 2, it's clear that this was a sexual sin, which can only be Genesis chapter 6, that they were in chains in gloomy darkness until the judgment. Revelation 9, the abyss opens up, they come out. These would be the titans of Greek religion, by the way, and also another group that we will talk about shortly. The Mesopotamians knew who the titans and the sons of God were. They had a different name for them. Bottom line here is the problem of evil has an answer, and those who are posing the question today just don't like the answers. There are some wonderful discernment ministries, or rather apologetics ministries, not discernment, apologetics ministries online that deal with this question. This is not really my calling. I'm just bringing this up because this is what's behind this teaching that Yahweh is not the Father and that Yahweh is not Jesus. But we're going to go to his conclusions and address those rather than trying to keep bandaging up the death by 1,000 paper cuts approach of trying to debunk the gospel. Because if he started with his conclusions, then I think most people would say, well, I mean, not to be rude, but there's a reason that many teachers who are trying to draw people away from the Bible lay a sort of series of theological breadcrumbs. Well, that kind of makes sense. And so then that kind of makes sense. And then that kind of makes sense. And before you know it, like the old gospel song goes, you've drifted too far from the shore. So let's go out into the deep waters and address the claims, and I'll show you why those cannot possibly be true, which then suggests something about the chain of logic that led to those conclusions. The claim by this particular teacher is that the Father in the Bible, that Jesus' true Father, and by the way, he makes the claim that Jesus and Yahweh are brothers and that they are both persons, not spirit. They are physical persons with physical bodies, similar in a sense to what the Church of Latter-day Saints teaches, okay? That they were both created beings then, and thus not the creator, contrary to John chapter 1, where Jesus is identified as the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, Yahweh in John's view, and the Word was God. Now, this particular gentleman would disagree with that identification, but the vast majority of Christian theologians would agree, yeah, that's exactly what John was writing about. But let's take this the other way around. His contention is that Yahweh and Jesus are brothers, created beings, and that the Father, the true Father, since in his view it's not Yahweh, is the Mesopotamian sky god Anu. A-N-U, Anu, who is the father of most of the gods, including the great gods of ancient Sumer, who included Enlil, who was the king of the pantheon, until Marduk came along. That transfer took place around the time of Saul, David, and Solomon, around the turn of the millennium, around 1000 BC. So Anu, the sky god, the true father, he has a couple of sons, Enlil and Enki among them. There are some others, but these are the two that are relevant here because in his cosmology, Yahweh is Enlil, who is Satan. And as I mentioned in last week's program, you can make the case that Enlil is Satan. I disagree. I think Enlil is Shemyaza, but that's not really relevant to the discussion this week. And I say you can make the case because the Hebrew in Isaiah 14:12, translated into the Latin Vulgate as Lucifer, that's really just a Latin translation of the Hebrew Halel, which means light bringer. And Halel, according to scholar William R. Gallagher, writing back in 1994, is the West Semitic, i.e. Hebrew, transliteration of the Akkadian name Elil, which is just the Akkadian form of Enlil. So if you identify the rebel in Isaiah 14 as Satan, which I do not, but if you do, then you can say, okay, Satan is Enlil. Well, this is where we get that case. And then his contention is that Yahweh is Satan based on another line of logic. We talked about this last week, the Good Father Discourse. He further claims that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Mesopotamian god Enki. And I will deal with that in just a bit because that is not only incorrect, I will show that both Enlil and Enki were directly opposed by Yahweh in the Bible. First of all, Enlil, My book, The Second Coming of Saturn, really digs deep into this because I believe Enlil is Shemyaza, who led that rebellion in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. The sons of God saw that the daughters of man were fair, took wives of any they chose. I traced the character of this entity through history. Shemyaza, who was punished with his colleagues, according to the book of 1st Enoch, and sent down to the netherworld. This is not explained in detail in the Bible, but we do, again, get those references in 2 Peter 2, verse 4, and Jude, verses 6 and 7, of the angels who sinned back in Genesis 6, being chained in gloomy darkness, and Peter specifically placing them in the abyss. This is somewhat circumstantial evidence, but it does point to these entities being the same as the Titans of Greek and Roman myth. These were the former gods led by the king of the Titans, Kronos or Saturn, who were overthrown by the Olympians in the fake news pagan version of the story, replaced by the storm god, Zeus to the Greeks, Jupiter to the Romans, and the rest of the Olympians, the Titans confined in Tartarus until whenever. Okay? Turns out this story is not really new, and it's not original to the Greeks, who everybody agrees is the original version of the Roman pantheon. A couple of the deities in the Roman pantheon sharing the same name as their Greek counterpart, Apollo most notably. But going back about 80 years, there was a series of texts found at the Hittite capital of Hattusha. It's in what is now central Turkey. These were Hittite texts that preserved the ancient Hurrian religion. The Hurrians were a group of people who emerged in history around the beginning of the 4th millennium BC. Around 4000, 3000 BC, they moved from what is now Armenia, the Ararat Plain, the region below, the mountains of Ararat, and spread out along the northern arc of Mesopotamia. They basically comprised the outer ring of Mesopotamia from northwestern Iran through the Kurdish regions of Iraq and Syria, down through what is now Lebanon, down as far as the Sea of Galilee, and even beyond, because they show up in the Bible as the Horites. And we find Horites, fighting the kings from the east, Kedorlaomer and his colleagues who do battle against the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. They fight the Horites at the edge of the wilderness of Paran, which is in the vicinity of Mount Sinai. So somewhere southeast of the Dead Sea, they fought the Horites. David, when he bought the threshing floor of Arana, that word Arana, scholars agree, is based on the Hurrian word for Lord. So the Hurrians were all through the lands of the Bible. So they brought with them their religion and their gods. And I go into this in great detail in The Second Coming of Saturn, how their practice of summoning spirits from the netherworld is reflected in the Bible, especially the story of King Saul going to visit the medium of Endor the night before he was killed in battle against the Philistines. That practice is documented among the Hurrians going back 2,000 years, 2,500 years before the time of Saul and David. And those texts preserved by the Hittites, which showed that the Greeks essentially got their religion from the Hurrians. And the Hurrian form of the myth, their sky god, also called Anu, like the Mesopotamian sky god, which shows that there's a connection there between those two. The god Kumarbi, who was the Hurrian form of Enlil and Saturn and Kronos, also El of the Canaanites. Kumarbi overthrew Anu, the sky god, and castrated him, similar to the Greek myth, except that where Kronos did it with a sickle, Kumarbi did it with his teeth. Yeah, I know. Ew. And in turn, Kumarbi was overthrown by the storm god named Teshub, and then he was banished to the netherworld. The Hurrians didn't call them Titans, they called them the former gods, but they were banished to the netherworld where they were incarcerated behind bars of brass. And so same story, different names. But that does raise an interesting question. If in this cosmology, Anu is the true creator of all things and the father of Yahweh / Enlil and Yeshua / Enki, why would one choose to follow a god who'd been castrated? I mean, in the Greek myth, Oranos, in the Roman myth, Caelus, same deal. Castrated by sun, Saturn, Kronos, Kumarbi. The point of the story of castrating the god was to show that he was now powerless. And in my view, Anu is a false construct put forward by these fallen Elohim, these lesser Elohim, as a fake Yahweh. Oh yeah, he's the creator, but he's powerless, he's remote. The only one who can get to him is Enlil. This is according to the Sumerian, Akkadian myths. But he doesn't care about humans anymore. No, I'm sorry. That is not our God. That is not, Anu is not the true Father, the true Creator. He's a story made up, in my view. Now, I don't have any documentation to prove this, and this kind of speaks to the issue at hand here, because there is very, very little in the texts that have been discovered by archaeologists and epigraphers over the last 200 years connecting the Hebrew religion with Mesopotamian religion. There is some, but not a lot. But there's absolutely nothing that connects Anu to the Hebrew Bible, nothing that connects Yahweh to Enlil. In fact, I will show you that Yahweh and Enlil, Yahweh actually directly calls out Enlil in several places in the Bible. In the second coming of Saturn, I showed that it was well known among the people of the ancient world, and we know this from trilingual god lists found at the Amorite kingdom of Ugarit, that Kumarbi and El of the Canaanites and Enlil of the Akkadians, Babylonians, Sumerians were the same entity. We also know from other bilingual god lists from the ancient Near East that Enlil and Dagon were the same entity. In fact, they even had the same main epithet, Great Mountain. Great Mountain. Enlil's temple at the city of Nippur was the E-Kur, the mountain house, or house of the mountain, where all the gods of Mesopotamia would meet once a year to decree the fates of the land. So keep that in mind. Now, as I began piecing this evidence together during the writing or the research for the second coming of Saturn, the evidence became clear that the god of the Ammonites, which was the small kingdom based around what is now Ammon, Jordan, in the time of, from the Judges onward, really even from the time of the Exodus onward, because they had to go around the Ammonite territory, according to God. He wasn't going to give them any of their land because the Ammonites, like the Moabites, descended from Lot's nephew, or Abraham's nephew, Lot. The chief god of the Ammonites was called Milcom. And a scholar who looked into what's called onomasticon, or the list of names taken from Ammonite texts, found that contrary to what you'd expect, the national god of Ammon should have been the most popular theophoric element or god name incorporated into personal names. The theophoric element is like Micah El or Hezekiah Yah. But when he looked at the Ammonite names, it was not Milcom that showed up most often. It was Ilu or El. So El was really the chief god of the Ammonites. It's just they called him Milcom, which was their word that meant king. Well, the Hebrews twisted it to make it a pejorative, which they did with other ancient Near Eastern deities like Baal. They changed to Bosheth to mean shameful thing. Astarte became Ashtoreth. Or excuse me, it was Asherah became Ashtoreth, which means shameful thing. And they did the same with Milcom, but they transformed it to Molech. So El, who was Dagon, who was Enlil, was also Molech. And going back as far as Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, we know that God prohibited very specifically and forcefully the sacrifice of children to Molech. Now, when I say God, I mean Yahweh, because it's specific in the Old Testament that it is Yahweh who tells Moses to tell the Israelites, don't do this because this is absolutely forbidden. All right? So, in his form, Molech, Enlil directly condemned, the worship of Molech, directly condemned by Yahweh. Yahweh cannot be Enlil. Oh, I guess I put those little... it's a Mac thing. I got to turn off those little reactions. They catch you with a thumbs up and they send a thumb. Anyway, we also find, of course, in the story of Samson, the condemnation of Dagon and how Dagon is humiliated by Samson or by Yahweh, not only in the destruction of his temple, but when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in the chief temple of Dagon, the idol representing Dagon, giving locality to the god when the priests of Dagon came in to pray to him, was face flat, basically stretched out on its face, with his hands cut off, which is a thing in the ancient world to humiliate and basically mutilate a conquered enemy so that he could never hurt you again. You would cut off the hands of the soldiers of the enemy army or the enemy king, cut off the thumbs or cut off the hands. Scholars in Egypt last year found a cache with a bunch of hands probably cut off from the Hyksos, who were the Canaanite interlopers who came in and ruled the Nile Delta for a couple of centuries. So God, Yahweh, humiliating Dagon in a couple of incidents in the Old Testament, both through Samson and when the Ark of the Tabernacle, or the Ark of the Covenant rather, was taken into the chief temple of Dagon, and the idol representing Dagon forced to basically prostrate itself and have its hands cut off in front of the Ark of the Covenant, which according to the Old Testament is where Yahweh resided above the cherubim above the ark. So again, Dagon being Enlil, Yahweh humiliating Dagon, Yahweh cannot be Enlil. We also see this in Zechariah chapter 4, a wonderful verse that many of us have heard before, but not the whole verse. And let me bring this up so I'm not doing this from memory, because memory not necessarily my strong suit anymore, unless we're talking about like baseball, the 1969 Chicago Cubs or what have you. Zechariah chapter 4, the verse in question here, again, the one we've mainly heard, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, capital S spirit there. Hey, there's the third member of the Trinity right there in Zechariah 4, verse 6, says Yahweh of hosts, Yahweh of armies. Zechariah 4, verse 6, this again, Yahweh speaking to Zerubbabel, who's tasked with building the temple, rebuilding the temple that had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar about 140 years earlier. Verse 7 now. I mean, we've heard this, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts, says Yahweh of hosts. Yahweh in the Hebrew, just to put too fine a point on it. Verse 7, who are you, O great mountain? Oh, there's that nickname of Enlil and Dagon again. Who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you shall become a plain. Many Bible teachers will look at this and say, well, the great mountain, that just represents a big problem. Zerubbabel had a major issue. He was trying to build the temple. This was an obstacle he had to overcome. No, I'm sorry. Look, the Israelites were coming back to Jerusalem after spending nearly 150 years in the middle of Babylonia. They knew who the great mountain was. And God was saying, who are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel, you shall become a plain. Dagon, Enlil, not Yahweh. Yahweh, in fact, condemning them through the prophet Zerubbabel, or through the prophet Zechariah in this conversation with Zerubbabel. So, Anu, not the true father. Yahweh, not Enlil. Now, Yeshua as Enki. I'm not even quite sure where this comes about. I know that there's a video teaching out there claiming that Yeshua is the Lord of water, and somehow this equates to the temple of Enki in Mesopotamia, because in Mesopotamia, Enki, his temple called the E-abzu, or House of the Abyss, very important spiritual location for many, many years. But I'm going to suggest that it was, in fact, the Tower of Babel, which Yahweh very specifically destroyed. He destroyed as it was being built. Enki, by the way, was the one who was believed to have sent out the what they call the cultural heroes, the sages from his underground E-abzu, abyss. He sent forth these sages with the gifts of civilization to humanity. These were called the abgal by the Sumerians, or by the Akkadians, the apkallu. Apkallu is a word, compound word, that essentially means big watermen. They came from the abyss. They brought the gifts of civilization, all this knowledge from the gods that we humans needed to live the way the gods intended for us to live. Enki sent them forth from the abyss to give us all of this wonderful knowledge. This, again, the city at which this temple was located, E-abzu, very important in the spiritual life of ancient Mesopotamia. To a Jew in the ancient world, they would have understood seed, like Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. This was not Nebuchadnezzar the second who destroyed the temple, but Nebuchadnezzar the first, who was contemporary with Saul and David. He called himself distant scion of kingship, seed preserved from before the flood. Now, Jews understood what that means. His seed preserved from before the flood meant a descendant of the Watchers. And that's who the apkallu were to the Mesopotamians. Scholar named Amar Annus, A-N-N-U-S. Look him up at academia.edu. He's done some amazing research on this, not only showing that the apkallu of the Mesopotamians were the watchers of Hebrew religion, he also showed that the Greek demigod heroes like Heracles and Perseus were in fact Rephaim. Etymologically, he showed that the word used for the demigod heroes from before the flood by the poets Homer and Hesiod, who wrote most of what we know about Greek religion, both of them rough contemporaries of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. The phrase meropes anthropoi, anthropoi obviously is where we get words like anthropology, meaning related to humans, but meropes derives from the same Semitic root, RP, as the Canaanite Repayuma and Hebrew Rephaim. Now, it took me multiple readings of that particular paper titled, Were There Greek Rephaim? You can find it at academia.edu. I encourage you to read it. He also shows that the origin of the name Titan, those old gods of the Greeks, comes from the name of the Amorite tribe Tidanu, who helped destroy the last Sumerian kingdom in ancient Mesopotamia around 2000 BC. They were later, around the time of the Judges, they were being venerated as underworld gods, the Tidanu, the Council of Tidanu, the Council of the Titans. The Amorites continued to venerate these old mighty men, the mighty men who were of old. Anyway, I'm digressing here, but the point is, all of this is interconnected. And when we start putting all of this together, what evidence we do have from Greece, Rome, the Hurrians, the Hittites, the Bible, the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, this worldview falls apart. Anu, not the creator, not the father, Yahweh, not Enlil, and Yeshua, not Enki. And here is why. Enki at E-abzu. E-abzu remembered by the Sumerians as the first city this is where kingship was first lowered from heaven. And when scholars began to dig into the site of the Temple of Enki at E-abzu back in 1949, they found 18 levels. 18 levels. The city of Enki, E-abzu, was so important to Mesopotamian culture that when Hammurabi the Great was crowned king of Babylon around the year 1792 BC, he made a point of noting in his famous law code that he reestablished E-abzu and purified the worship of E-abzu, the house of the abyss. And even as late as the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the Nebuchadnezzar who destroyed the temple of Yahweh, that he was crowned, and one of his titles was Lugal Nun Ki, meaning king of E-abzu. Now, the great god Enki, that name, compound name meaning Lord, and Ki, earth, Lord of the earth. Interesting, God, Jesus, that is, used that title or a similar title for Satan. you can build a stronger case that Enki is Satan than Jesus, but I digress. This dates back, the temple of Enki, to at its lowest level to roughly 5400 BC. This according to the scholars who did the excavation there around 1949. They found some of these levels, the 18 levels that they discovered, were below an 8-foot thick layer of silt deposited by a massive flood. So after the flood, there is a poem titled Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta. Enmerkar was on the Sumerian king list. He's the second king after the flood, just as in the Bible, Nimrod is the second generation after the flood. Scholar David Roll, who I don't agree with about everything, but I think he is correct about this, or makes a strong case for it anyway, that Enmerkar, the Sumerian king, is the biblical Nimrod. And there is Sumerian poetry that exists to this day titled Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta. The point of the poem, this epic poem, is that Enmerkar wanted this king of Aratta to send building materials for the reconstruction of the temple of Enki. Why? Well, because in southeast Iraq, where E-abzu is located, where Enmerkar's home city of Uruk is located, very little in the way of building materials, mainly sand and marshland. No timber, no stone, no metals like copper or silver or anything. All of that had to come from as far away as Turkey, which in the time of Enmerkar, what scholars call the Uruk period of history, between about 3900 and 3100 BC, Uruk actually controlled all of that land, from the Persian Gulf to the Taurus Mountains of Turkey. And they had outposts along the Euphrates for shipping material down the river, documented by archaeologists. So the poem, Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta, which may be modern-day Armenia, because Aratta may be an alternate transliteration of Urartu or Ararat, both of which are in the area of Lake Van in what is now eastern Turkey. This kingdom, wherever it is, Enmerkar was trying to put the screws to him to get the building material. Quote, "My sister," he's praying to the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, "let Aratta fashion gold and silver skillfully on my behalf for Uruk. Let them cut the flawless lapis lazuli from the blocks. Let them..." something, there's a gap they call what do they call that in the text? A lacuna. The translucence of the flawless lapis lazuli, gap. "Build a holy mountain in Uruk. Let Aratta build a temple brought down from heaven, your place of worship, the shrine Eanna, house of heaven and earth. Let Aratta skillfully fashion the interior of the holy Jipar, your abode. May I, the radiant youth, may I be embraced there by you. Let Aratta submit beneath the yoke for Uruk on my behalf." This poem was basically a prayer to Inanna, the goddess of sex and war, and embrace is a euphemism for, this is what was going on. Anyway, the point of rebuilding or building the Eanna for Inanna was to replace Anu, the sky god, as the patron deity of Uruk, which we know happened. The sky god was the patron deity of Uruk. He was pushed out in favor of the goddess of sex and war, who we've said elsewhere, and you could look up our teachings on this, Inanna was the first gender fluid entity on earth. There are ancient Sumerian poems that praise her for being able to change men into women and women into men. And her followers were often castratos, Anyway, the other point of this confrontation between Uruk and Aratta is to get building material to build the temple, or rebuild the temple of Enki. And I'll quote now, "Let the people of Aratta bring down for me the mountain stones from their mountain. Build the great shrine for me. Erect the great abode for me. Make the great abode the abode of the gods." Underline that. "Famous for me, make my meh proper in Kulaba." The meh, or the mes, plural, were these principles of civilization that were brought by the apkallu to human civilization. Enki controlled the mes. which basically meant he was in charge of human civilization until, according to another myth, his niece, Inanna, goddess of sex and war, came to the E-abzu, the abyss, got Enki drunk and stole the mess and went back to her temple, which Enmerkar had built in the city of Uruk. This is who this particular gentleman thinks is Yeshua, is Jesus, trying to get jiggy with his niece, and instead he fell asleep drunk, and she stole the principles, the guiding principles of civilization. Anyway, I continue. Make Eridu, or make the E-abzu, make the abyss, grow for me like a holy mountain. Make Eridu gleam for me like the mountain range. Cause the E-abzu shrine to shine forth for me like the silver in the lode. When in the E-abzu I utter praise. When I bring the meh from Eridu. When in lordship I am adorned with the crown like a purified shrine. When I place on my head the holy crown of Urug Kulaba, then may the something of the great shrine bring me into the Japar, and may the, another gap in the text, of the Japar bring me into the great shrine. May the people marvel admiringly, and may Utu, the sun god, witness it in joy. So, okay, summarizing. He wants building materials to build up the temple of Enki, the E-abzu, the house of the abyss, into the abode of the gods. Okay? That is the key here. And this particular poem, Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, even remembers the confusion of languages. This is the Tower of Babel. Quote, once upon a time there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, no terror. Man had no rival. In those days, the lands of Suber, which was northern Mesopotamia, basically Assyria, and Hamazi, that I don't know where it is, harmony-tongued Sumer, the great land of the decrees of princeship, Uri, the land having all that is appropriate, the land Martu, that's the land of the Amorites, basically western Mesopotamia, having resting in security, the whole universe, the people in unison to Enlil in one tongue spoke. Then Enki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who understands the land, the leader of the gods, endowed with wisdom, the Lord of Eridu, changed the speech in their mouths, brought contention into it, into the speech of man that until then had been one. So understand, right there you've got in one epic poem from ancient Mesopotamia, you have all of the elements of the Tower of Babel incident. You've got wanting to rebuild. In fact, when the archaeologists back in 1949 were excavating the top level of the temple of Enki, they found that it would have been the largest. I mean, it was already the oldest, but it would have been the largest ziggurat in all of Mesopotamia, bigger than the great ziggurat of Ur, which was dedicated to the moon god, Sin or Nana. And then in Babylon, it was bigger than the Temple of Marduk in Babylon. This would have been the biggest, except that it was never finished. Why? Well, Genesis chapter 11. And Yahweh said, behold, they are one people and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So Yahweh dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. This is exactly what the archaeologists found in 1949. They couldn't figure out why. It was just suddenly abandoned and very quickly covered over with drifting sand, according to the archaeologists. I've read the report, have a copy of it on PDF, published in 1949. They date this to the end of the Uruk period, 3100 BC. In other words, this coincided with the end of that period where the city of Uruk, the city of Nimrod, dominated the ancient Near East, dominated everything between the Euphrates and the Tigris from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Turkey. Archaeologists have confirmed it. It's just not very well known. But the odds that Jesus, the Jesus of the New Testament, would be the Lord of the abyss and the one who brought forth the apkallu, who secular peer-reviewed scholarship shows are the watchers of the Hebrews. It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Yahweh is not the Lord of the abyss. He did not send forth the watchers to corrupt humanity, to teach us forbidden knowledge. Yahweh, not Enlil, because we see in the Old Testament that Yahweh directly condemns the worship of the entity known to the ancients as Enlil, Dagon, Molech. Same entity by different names. And in the Bible, Yahweh confronts him and condemns him. So this teaching, dangerous in a couple of ways, because it draws people away from the biblical definition of who God is and who Jesus is. But it also leads to a really disturbing conclusion, because if Yahweh is Satan, if the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Old Testament, is Satan, then who have the Jews been worshiping for the last 3,400 years? And where does that conclusion take you? This is why I'm spending time on this particular subject, because it is dangerous not only in terms of salvation, but it's dangerous in terms of how we deal with the people of Israel. And God is pretty clear in the Old Testament that, and Paul is clear in Romans chapter 11, that he is not yet done with the Jews. More on that in another program. Coming up, we've got, conference to tell you about in December. We've got a personal thing that I will share with you that may lead to some schedule inconsistency over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And another opportunity to discuss Kamala Harris, bless her pointy little head, straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues. Our new book, The Gates of Hell, is available now, and we have a special offer on it at the Gilbert House store.
You know, you're not going to find a deal like this anywhere else. You're going to get the book, which is a $21.95 value. You're going to get 3 DVDs.
More than 12 hours of video content, plus the book for just $45. That's half price.
That's half price because the whole package at retail is over $90.
The Gates of Hell tackles mysteries like where was Jesus baptized and why did he choose to get baptized in a place known as the Land of the Serpent?
Oh my goodness, you want this deal. This is the kind of thing that you can share with your friends, share with your pastor, read again, because trust me, the source information that Derek and I used for this, you're not going to find it anywhere else.
Right. It's not just an archaeological or historical curiosity. It is relevant to us today. Again, a special offer for the month of October only at gilberthouse.org/store. Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. Yes, I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at VFTB.net. Social media. X, formerly Twitter, at View from Bunker, at Derek Gilbert, at @GilbertHouse_TV on Facebook. The View from the Bunker page there. Also on Truth Social and Gab, at Derek P. Gilbert. YouTube, it's at Gilbert House. Please subscribe, share, click the bell for notifications, hit that like button, and then please download our mobile app. You can also get one for TV. We've got versions for Roku, Apple TV, and now Amazon Fire Stick and Fire TV, Google TV, Android TV as well. But iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire, that gets all of our content right into your smartphone or tablet. Also guarantees that if we ever get canceled for violating terms of service or community guidelines or some such, which this problem will probably reoccur. We've had it happen a couple of times already on this program. You will be protected and we will not be canceled. So you'll find that at gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. Well, once again, Kamala Harris proving that she is just the pre-scripted candidate, went to North Carolina in the wake of Hurricane Helene to show that she is fully engaged and fully part of the Biden administration's efforts to assist the people of North Carolina. It is really, really astonishing what has gone on there. I mean, she had a staged photo op with people from FEMA during the run-up to Helene, where she really didn't do anything. They didn't allow her to take any questions or answer any questions from the press. The press was just shuttled in, took video of her sitting at the head of a table with a bunch of FEMA officials, and then they were shuttled back out again. They did essentially the same thing in North Carolina, where according to report from Sean Ryan, who is a podcast host, Sean Ryan interviewed a couple of members of the North Carolina National Guard aerial recovery team members, Jonathan Howard and Charlie Keebaugh. They were guests on Sean Ryan's show, and they reported this. I'm going to quote, "I had a squadron commander from North Carolina reach out to me. They had to load a C-17 full of supplies just to take a photo op for Kamala, but they never sent the bird." In other words, the supplies were put on the C-17 cargo plane to make it look as though she was overseeing or somehow engaged in the sending of relief supplies to people who desperately needed it, but those supplies never went anywhere. They did a photo op with the intention of never sending aid. It was just a photo op. Now, Aerial Recovery is a nonprofit organization focused on disaster response. They were active in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. Again, this interview available at Sean Ryan's podcast, but this then was compounded by earlier this week a Zoom call, the Biden administration having a briefing on what was going on in relation to the efforts to help people in Florida after Hurricane Milton. And Kamala came in via Zoom. She couldn't be bothered to come off the campaign trail for a day or two to actually be present. She came in via Zoom and apparently was getting some answers, or somebody was feeding her a question while the Zoom call was on, something they wanted her to ask to make it look like she was really engaged in what was going on. And she put her hand over her mouth like this and then said to somebody, "It's a live broadcast." Pro tip, if you're on a Zoom call, Alt-A on Windows, it's Command-Shift-A on Mac, if you need to mute your microphone. Bless her pointy little head. Well, by the way, forgot to mention, the reason I've got the hat on here is because this is a new addition to the Gilbert House store, thanks to our friends Kenny C., The Rock, and his fiancée, Gidget Manning. They are the people behind Light Hive Creations. They are making the hats for us, the GHTV hats. Now, PID Radio, this is the old school PID Radio logo from when we created the podcast back. Clearly, it's time for the dog wrestling show. The podcast, which began 19 and a half years ago. So you can get these hats. We've also got T-shirts, mugs, and more. And as I've said, the real beauty part of this is that it doesn't just support us. Kenny's a music teacher. Many of his students are children. Now, Doug Van Dorn is also one of his students. Doug's kind of a kid, fun, loving sort of guy. Anyway, many of his students come from families where affording a musical instrument like a guitar or a keyboard is really stretching the budget, especially now with the economy the way it is. So by supporting us through PID Radio, GHTV, Red Wing Saga merch, mugs, T-shirts, caps. Girls, let's keep the ring area over there. Thank you. You're also helping Kenny and his music students, and we really appreciate that. You'll find that at the main page at gilberthouse.org/store, gilberthouse.org/store. I mentioned something before the break about a personal thing that may be leading to, hey, girls, we're going to get serious here for a minute, okay? Thank you. This is how Glory gets attention. She's still a puppy, about 10 months old, so she is still full of vinegar. Grace would be happy to just sit here and let me scratch her, but Glory, it is her life's mission to remove Grace's collar from her neck, which she does at least once a day. Had to go out in the backyard and find it earlier today. That's always a challenge for us too. It's a fun game. Where is Grace's collar? Anyhow, for the last 18 months, I've been experiencing some increasing neuropathy in my feet. It started as pain. First noticed it when we were in Israel last March. There were days when we were walking where it really felt like my feet were being poked with pins as we were walking. And it would go away, then it would come back again the next day, and then go away while we were walking. I thought, okay, I don't know what it is. I don't think the shoes are a problem. They fit. They've been comfortable in years past, and suddenly, I see now that what was happening was the nerves were giving up the ghost or whatever, and this was their way of saying goodbye so long, As we got into this year, over the course of this year, I've noticed that the first 3 toes on both feet have become increasingly numb. I still have feeling in them, some sensation in them, but they feel about half numb all the time. Anyway, this past Monday, went to my doctor, saw the nurse practitioner and said, okay, this is what's going on. I mentioned this 6 months ago when I was here. It has progressed since then. What can we do about this? And so she took a look at them, asked, are your feet always this color? Because they were kind of purpley blue. They were cold, but she thought based on the speed at which they recovered color after she pressed on the skin, which was slowly, she thought there was a vascular issue. So they sent me for testing on Tuesday. So I spent Tuesday driving between Springfield and Branson because on short notice they couldn't get me in all at once in the same facility. I had a CAT scan, one of those things where they inject dye into you and they track where it goes, and went for an ultrasound in Branson that afternoon because they wanted to check blood flow. They wanted to check to see if there were any blockages. So the good news is that it doesn't appear that the blood flow has been impeded to any great degree, which suggests that what we're dealing with is neurological, possibly. But what they did discover, thanks to the neuropathy in my feet, the tingling in my toes, what have you, was a couple of aneurysms in the left iliac artery, which these are called saccular aneurysms. One is measuring about 2.6 centimeters, the other 2.4. The larger one has clotted over, so it's not at risk of rupturing. The smaller one, the vascular surgeon, they scheduled me to get in to see a vascular surgeon right away. They wanted me to do it on Wednesday. Couldn't do it Wednesday because we were actually filming a couple of documentaries that we'll tell you about as we get closer to the release date. But on Thursday, went and saw the vascular surgeon in Springfield. He says that the smaller of the two, the 2.4 centimeter aneurysm, is also at very low risk of rupture. At that size, from what I've read, typically below 3 centimeters is very low risk. Some places around the world, they don't even recommend an intervention until they're above 4 centimeters. So it's not likely to be a problem, but it's the kind of thing where if it defies the odds and decides to burst, the mortality rate is very high, between 33 and 50%. So basically, given where we live, especially out in the country, but even, if we were in the city, the mortality rate is like a coin flip if you even make it to the hospital. So I've been scheduled for surgery to repair this. Essentially, they're putting in it's not a stent exactly, but it's kind of like a stent where they put it in to bypass the aneurysms so that the blood will not be pushing on those outer arterial walls at the location of the aneurysm. And who knows, it's possible that the clot on the larger aneurysm is in fact impeding blood flow, and that may help with the tingling, the feeling in my feet as well. So there will probably be a period of recovery from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on how things go. I'll just be in the hospital one night, barring any unexpected consequences. So hopefully back at work the next Monday, but because it's the surgery's on a Friday, second Friday in November the 8th. But if I know Sharon, she'll probably say, don't you dare try to start working again on Monday. So Anyway, if there are some schedule disruptions in the month of November and following, and even up through this month, because I've got some testing I've got to have done between now and the surgery, it will be what it will be. We'll put it out on our social media feeds, whether it's X, our Telegram channels, which you can check. The links for our Telegram channels are in the notes below. Facebook, what have you. We'll just let people know. And Joe Artishorn has been very gracious. He says I can do 5 and 10 from the hospital bed if I want. So that'll be fine. Joe has got a wonderful sense of humor, and I know the spirit in which he meant that. I have not afraid of this or anything. I mean, you're a Christian, you're going to threaten me with sending me to Jesus. No, not concerned. Just want to stay healthy as long as possible, to continue doing the work that we're doing, to share the hope that we have in Jesus and the biblical reasons, the archaeological reasons for the hope that we have. And that is why we do the programs that we do, the Bible study that we do, and we are blessed and honored to be able to do this, which you make possible through your prayers and through your support. So thank you for that. A couple of conferences to tell you about. Skywatch TV has a virtual conference that will begin November 30th. Now, a virtual conference means you get access to a couple dozen video presentations starting November 30th, and you get 90 days access to watch what you choose to watch when you choose to watch it. People who are contributing presentations for this conference, which is called the Resurrection War, because really what this is all about is about resurrection, our bodily resurrection. This is something to look forward to. Glorified bodies without arthritis and aneurysms and all other sorts of things. Carl Gallups, Rabbi Zev Porat, Vicky Joy Anderson, Dr. Mike Spalding, Judd Burton, Dr. Igal German, Doug Van Dorn, Ryan Peterson, Mondo de la Vega, Ricky Baker, Mondo Gonzalez, Troy Anderson, Colonel David Giamona, and more. And you'll find the list of speakers and have a place to register at defenderconference.com. Then the Branson Christmas Prophecy Conference. I should be healed by then, so I'm looking forward to it. The Chateau on the Lake in Branson, December 5th through 8th. I'll be speaking along with L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, Billy Crone, Ken Johnson, Josh Peck, Mondo Gonzalez, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Alex Newman, Brandon Holthouse, Olivier Melnick, Larry Allison, Doug Hershey, and more. Patrick M. Wood. This is a great lineup, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of these fellows in person. Patrick Wood especially, Alex Newman, Brandon Holthouse, a pastor who I actually heard talk about the apkallu from the pulpit. I mean, I watched it on YouTube. I wasn't actually there at his church out there in California, but look forward to meeting and talking with him and maybe getting some interviews that we can bring back. Again, this is December 5th through 8th at the Chateau on the Lake in Branson. Hotels already booked up, but there are plenty of other hotels in the Branson area and lots of other things to do at Christmas time in Branson. More information online, BransonChristmasProphecyConference.com. Next spring, we are still planning to go to Israel, our Iron and Myth tour with Doug Van Dorn, Dr. Judd Burton, and Timothy Alberino, March 25th through April 3rd. Obviously, the situation on the ground will determine whether we continue with that. We will probably make a decision in December, about 90 days out, because we know you need time to make your schedule, and we just feel terrible for our friends in Israel. Not only that they're under fire, but also that their economic livelihoods have been just completely torn up. That's just a fact. Who wants to go to Israel right now, other than those who are going to volunteer and help bring in the crops for farmers? God bless them for doing that. Here's the thing that hadn't even occurred to me until Sharon pointed this out. November 8th, the date I'm scheduled to be in surgery, is a date we would have been there had we proceeded with our solidarity mission. So perhaps the Lord had a reason for kind of steering us gently away from that event. But God willing, we will be there next March 25th through April 3rd, and you can find out more at gilberthouse.org/travel. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen. Whether you're watching at YouTube, again, click the like button, click subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. There's that thumb again. And please subscribe and then download our app at gilberthouse.org/app. If you're subscribing through a podcatcher like Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Thank you. Thank you. Our announcer, the inimitable DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And good night, Oliver, wherever you are. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.